Hey folks, my name is Cooper, and I am reviewing the game Inscryption. This is a game that came out back in 2021, created by Daniel Mullins, who is a one-man team, although he did have some help with the art, music, etc. He is a creator of two previous games, Pony Island and The Hex. Pony Island especially has a lot of similar themes to this game, especially with the fourth wall breaking and taking some sort of childlike elements of humanity and combining it with some of the horror, or at the very least, implication of horror in his games. Specifically, Inscryption was a pretty huge breakout game. I think there were 1 million units eventually that were sold, probably more by the time it was all said and done. This was a deck building game, has some roguelite elements to it, specifically with the game sort of repeating upon itself for multiple runs. Later arcs of the game don't have quite that same rogue-like element, but specifically the first act is very much a roguelite, where when you fail, you restart, and there are plot points that are meant for you to replay through the game multiple times to uncover certain things and to have a better chance of winning over time. This is a very difficult game to talk about without spoilers, which my goal is to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. I will do my best, but again, this is certainly a game that the less information you have on it going in, the better your experience is likely to be. So I would certainly recommend, if you think this is a game that you're going to like, go ahead and just get it and give it a chance, especially if you can get it on sale. But if you still need more of a sales pitch, or if you've played the game previously and are just looking for some more people talking about it, I think this is hopefully going to be a good video for you. The card game itself is interesting, and I found it a lot of fun, especially, again, in the first act. I found the latter couple of acts less fun. Actually, as the game got a little more complicated, I enjoyed it a little bit less. I also found the first arc, the gameplay, to be the most challenging, which was never at a point where it was too difficult or even frustrating necessarily, but the second acts actually got, or the latter acts got a little bit less difficult, even to a point where I would say it got somewhat easy. And I'm not necessarily somebody who's some elite gamer, so I would say that that's probably a pretty common sentiment, I would imagine. The game, again, the mechanics of the game are pretty simple. You start out with very simple gameplay, and you have rules that are added on over time. You also discover new cards, you discover new items. Those are the things that really enhance the gameplay, but the basic rules are more or less set pretty quickly into the game. I do appreciate, though, that they are broken down into its core elements. Again, you'll discover the rules within a couple of hours, but it's not necessarily like you're just given a handbook, although there is a rule book in the game, but you'll generally learn through experience rather than reading instructions. And especially with this being a roguelite, where losing is not just okay, but it is necessary for developing and advancing the plot over time. That's something that's okay. You'll lose and you will fail, and that will give you access to more items. You'll uncover puzzles. Occasionally there will be hints and whatnot. Personally, I found that the progression through the game was a lot more of an active progression. I had trouble how I would phrase this, but I guess as opposed to there being just a clear linear storyline that you would follow, you generally had to prompt the plot to progress. So theoretically, you could play through the first act infinitely without actually uncovering any of the necessary puzzles. The card game itself has a very clear start, middle, and end, but just playing through that and winning the card game does not actually advance the plot past a certain point. So you do have to be more of an active participant in pushing the plot forward, which I found very cool. That's pretty unusual for most video games. I would say that the puzzles, I'm somebody that in games tends to get stuck on puzzles pretty often, especially ones that are not obvious that they are even puzzles. They're things that you kind of have to, again, it is more of an active role in you discovering that something needs to be done and then doing it, as opposed to the game saying, here's the problem that you have, now go and solve it, and you can't do anything else, right? You can always sit down and play the card game all the way through. There are certain puzzles that you're going to have to figure out this is even a puzzle to begin with. I will say that the game does a great job of giving you subtle hints and sort of guiding you to, again, not even just solving these puzzles, but realizing that there are puzzles to be solved. I am somebody that pretty often has to look at guides for games that have a lot of puzzles or, again, things that are a little bit more subtle. So this was not a game I had to look at a guide for at any point, which I appreciated a lot because this is not one you want to risk any sort of spoilers, even in terms of the actual structure of the game. But I still felt, again, despite the hints that were being given, they were subtle enough and infrequent enough that I felt like I was actually the one solving the puzzles, and I felt that sense of reward, which is very important. For me, I am somebody that really appreciates music and sound effects in games, movies, TV shows as well, but games are one that, again, the video game type of music with the whole 8-bit sort of analog type of music. The Undertale music is a classic one, but for me, the Zelda Wind Waker series, the Mario and Luigi Superstar Sega game, and the Pikmin game. Those are three that I really loved the music for those. I would say that Undertale is one. I've never played Undertale, but Undertale has a great soundtrack that I've listened to a lot as well. This is a game that has a lot of great music. A lot of it is more ambient music and sound. The sound effects themselves are actually really good as well. Even something like the teeth that would sort of clink into the scale, or your little character moving across the board in the game, I found just very rewarding or very soothing, although some of it was meant to be more ominous. Once you get established into the game, there are certain points where you'll feel a little creeped out, a little bit of, again, I would call it more horror influence than actually anything horror, straight up horror. But the sound in general, again, I found to be certainly something that would suck you into the game. I would say it was quite immersive for the most part. The art style is also very distinctive. The art, again, that's something that you'll see and is talked about a lot, but especially, and again, I'm trying not to get too much into the details, but the 4 scribes, which the initial game master that you're playing with is one of the 4 scribes. Each of them has a very distinct art style associated with them, and I think not only is it very fun, very creative, but it shows off their personalities and mannerisms a lot. Obviously, they have themes that you will discover pretty quickly on. It's not a mystery, it's not subtle. But I think that the art style that sort of enhances that gives you a great look into, again, not just what their theme is, but really matches with their personalities. And I think the characters themselves are not even necessarily fleshed out, but given a lot of flavor through that art. And again, the music that's associated with them and the various bosses as well. The boss music in this game I found to be very, very fun. The Trapper or the Trapper Trader combination is one of my favorites. And Magnificus, his boss battle, I found both of those to be very, very catchy. Magnificus especially has a little bit of art with this little dancing dude, which I found the combination of his music and the little dancing dude to be just fantastic. I found it great. The core story of Inscryption is one that is very much a mystery. You are plopped down at a table. There is no real exposition that's given to you, right? There's not really a lot of characters that you meet. You sit down at a table, you meet this game master, and you start playing a game. You are introduced to very few rules at first, very few cards, very few mechanics that you have to figure out, but incrementally you learn the game, and as you learn the game and progress, you get more and more bits of the story. It's very much something that you start with a small kernel of knowledge, and it sort of branches out and turns into this web, or spirals out, where you get all of this complex world that you kind of put together yourself. Again, the game is not necessarily one where you have to seek out answers, or maybe it's one that it does explicitly tell you a story, right? It's not Elden Ring where you have to read the lore and piece it together on on the internet or through YouTube videos. But there are a lot of things that you are discovering bits and pieces and saying, oh, well, this connects to that. Or again, there are periods where you'll go 30 minutes or an hour without really advancing the plot. And then when you get some of that lore, it makes it really valuable, at least in my mind. The game itself, especially again focusing more on the first act, does lend itself to. I guess it makes itself easier as it goes, especially again that sort of roguelite component that you have in the first act specifically. Every time that you lose, you are given a death card, which is generally going to be a very powerful card that you will usually be able to get into your deck on the next run that you have, which that is just generally going to make your run a little bit easier. The more powerful the cards, the better. And again, just as you learn, you understand strategies, you know how to buff your cards. And as you learn each of the bosses, right, the boss battles are slightly different each time. There's a lot of RNG associated with each individual battle. But you know the patterns, you know the different stages that are going to occur. So you know what pitfalls you need to avoid, and you can shape your strategies around those. And again, you were just given better cards as time goes. You have better items that you're given. So the game does make itself a little bit easier. It allows you to beat it over time. That also means that it's generally not something you're going to beat on your first try, which that's good, right? You don't want to be beating the game on your first try. I think for me, it probably took 6 or 7 runs before I actually got through the game. And then a few more runs after that to get to the actual ending of that first arc. There are a lot of leaps in the story that I would say, again, the fact that you have, it is very much a slow build and then a huge leap, a slow build and then a huge leap. I found that to be a very fun way of explaining the story. I am somebody that I think that the story in a game is very important to me. I play a lot of story-based single-player games, and this is one that really stuck out to me again. Not the most complex narrative in the world in terms of you're not reading hundreds and hundreds of pages, right? Something like Disco Elysium has hundreds of characters or dozens of characters, each with 100 pages of dialogue, right? This is not a heavily dialogue-based game. This is not even one where you're reading a ton of lore files. But the story that you get is one that you can easily expound upon in your mind. Something like the video recorder files, which again, I'm trying not to talk too much about the spoilers, but that is one of the fourth wall breaking mechanics, which again, just gives a lot of depth to the story. Not even in terms of depth of like deep emotions and whatnot, but literally like different layers of the story that you're sort of learning and understanding, and this mystery that you're uncovering. Sometimes, again, the idea of you can play the card game through a million times and never beat Inscryption. You have to go against what the game is telling you to do sometimes to actually progress the story. I would say that the characters, again, while there are only a few characters, again, the 4 major scribes, a few side characters, the characters are really what makes the game really memorable in my mind. Again, I think that the story is number one, but you can't have a good story without good characters for the most part, right? I mean, stories are driven by people, or like, not always humans, but characters. And this is a game that has some really well-defined characters. Despite you only getting a few conversations with them, you get a pretty good understanding of them, their motives. Again, their personalities are very strong and come out very clearly both through the art, the music, their dialogue, but also just, again, the circumstances that they and you are in. I thought that a few of the side characters were actually really good. So the Angler is one that, again, everybody I think will fall in love with the Angler. The mycologist is very unnerving and very creepy. The trapper-trader dynamic I thought was very cool. And my personal favorite is Lonely Wizard. I think everybody's going to like Lonely Wizard, but he is one that you just can't help but feel for. They're all just very lifelike, despite having very little dialogue. You're not having any conversation with them, really. It's just them sort of talking to you. There's no, text that's going back from your character, although it's implied. The characters just really stood out to me for how little dialogue there was. I felt like they just stick with me a lot, and I felt like I understood who they were, what their motives were, and why I should care about them. Again, the 4 main characters, the stoat, the stink bug, the wolf, the stunted wolf, and the game master all have very distinct personalities, which you can see in the art even, right? These are just little cartoon drawings, but you can sort of understand who these characters are. And again, as you learn later in the game about these characters and their true identities, you understand very quickly how this character that I saw in the first act is this character that I'm seeing later on, and they still have the same personality. I think that, again, even the cards with no personality, even just the lowly squirrels, right? Even the turkey vulture, the rattler, all these cards, I ended up feeling some sort of emotion towards, some sort of, like, when I sacrificed a card for a single bone, I felt bad about it. I felt awful. I didn't want my cards to die. I didn't want to sacrifice them. But that's part of the game. You have to. So I thought that the characters and how strongly I felt about them was just really impressive, given, again, how much of the game's focus is on the card game itself and the sort of intertwining, interlooping story. It's like, I can't remember what it is, but the thing in Good Place that that I can't even think of what it is right now, but it's like the shape of the world is like this funny name. That's how Inscryption feels, right? It feels like this sort of messy, cursive, all over the place story that still has very clear through lines. And I think the characters are a lot of what connects them. And I think that's really impressive. Overall, again, I think the plot is obviously the main draw for this game. The mystery aspect, the ability to sort of uncover, look at it at different layers, it's very three-dimensional in terms of there is progressing the storyline, and then there's also this sort of fourth wall breaking, this sort of different layers of the game. But also, I think that the writing just really, the characters really stuck with me, and I think that is, again, this is a game that lasts around 10 to 12 hours. I think for me it took 13 hours, so 10 to 15 hours maybe. It has a decent amount of replayability, again, without the story. There's Casey's mod, which I didn't get into, but has the elements of the card game without the actual story aspect, although, again, there is some lore with it. This is a game that has story outside of just the game. There are secrets that have been found. Again, this is, I can't get it too much into spoilers, but the idea of Inscryption, the game, being a part of the story itself, it's a whole world to get into. But again, I'm trying to stick away from spoilers as much as possible. I think that the art style is also phenomenal. Again, I'm not breaking any new ground here, but the way that it shifts based on the different characters and based on the different arcs. Again, something as simple as when you load into the game at the beginning of the game, in the first act, it's a green screen or some sort of forest looking color. When you're in the second act, it's a sepia looking screen. In the third act, it's a blue screen. It's just sort of that, whatever, environmental storytelling isn't even the right word, but just subtle things that make you feel like not only did the developer put a lot of care into this, but it just makes you feel like your progress matters, I would say is really what it felt like to me. In every section, again, the 4 scribes are very unique and distinctive. Each arc is very unique and distinctive. And just the various characters, the various items, the various objects, everything is just very distinctive art, which I really enjoyed. I said it before, but the sound effects and the music I'm a sucker for good music and good sound effects, and this is one of my favorite ones that I can remember of recent. Magnificus, his battle especially, is one that I'm going to go back to and listen to on YouTube several times. And I think that even something as simple as just the swishing and sludging sounds of the sludge guy, like I said before, the plinking of teeth into the cup when you've got bonus damage dealt, they're all just very distinctive sounds that sort of draw you into the game and make it feel like you are in this cabin with the game master. Or again, later on, the various sound effects make it feel like you're in different parts and give it completely different moods and environments as well, right? The first arc is much more of that horror based, and the second arc is very much more like you're in an RPG. And the sound and the sound effects, again, the music, but the sound effects themselves are a huge part of that. So I was very impressed by that. And one of the things that makes me love a game for sure. I think that one I guess complaint is the word to use, but one thing I would mention about it that wasn't my favorite, and it's somewhat a personal preference. I like having a story that is sort of tied up and neatly finished with a bow. Again, if you have a sequel coming on or something, that's different. And this game is one that, again, has a lot of hidden secrets in the files, these sort of um, things that you don't necessarily discover just playing through the game, sort of hidden secrets, codes that are mixed in. And a lot of that has been discovered, and it's something I've looked a little bit into, and you can find more information as you go. But I do like for my stories to be more of a tidy, clean, hey, here's where you started, here's where you're ending now, and here's the moral, here's the takeaway of it, right? Let's tie it up with a little bow. But again, that's a personal preference of mine. I would say, frankly, it's a little bit of a juvenile thing to want. This is a game with a really good story, and it's not something I have many complaints about, right? There is a lot of lore that comes from this game, despite, again, how little talking dialogue there really is. The characters are really strong and powerful. And the story does conclude. There is a very clear start, middle, and end to this story. There is very clear structure to it. Again, I'm somebody that I need a good amount of structure. I don't like things being completely open-ended, right? I don't want to just make up my own story. That's, again, this is a bit derivative, but you're the storyteller. Tell me your story. Let me hear your vision of it. And Daniel did a good job of that, right? He told his story. There's a little bit of open-endedness, but again, a lot of that is explained outside of the game, and it's different Easter eggs. And in the game itself, right? It definitely gives you a story, tells the story of the characters in the game, tells you the story of Inscryption as a whole, and ties itself up decently well at the end. Again, with some amount of an abstract ending, open-endedness, things for you to piece together yourself. I would say that, again, this game took me about 13 hours to play through. I had previously played through all of Act 1 and then dropped it and came back to it recently after a couple of years. I would say you should expect to get 10 to 15 hours out of just a straight playthrough. There's definitely a decent amount of replayability. I would say that for the most part, there's not like branching endings or anything, but there was a secret boss that I did not get into, as well as a couple of the hidden Easter eggs within the game. And then there's also Casey's mod, which I think is probably going to give you an extra 5 to 8 hours of gameplay if you want to just focus on the card game itself, which I think the card game is a lot of fun. I personally didn't want to spend a lot more time just playing with the card game. I will probably try Casey's mod at some point, but I think that overall it's going to get you at least 10 to 15 hours of not just gameplay, but focused, story-driven, mysterious gameplay, like real value-add hours of game. I would recommend this game for folks that, again, love stories, especially very mysterious ones. Ones with sort of that unique indie art style, and a lot of the mind-bending nature of the game, I think is very cool, without being too out of control and too wacky. In the turn-based combat, right? I think gamers that are used to some of those turn-based RPGs, games that are based on, again, it's a math-based game. It's not a bunch of complex math, though. You don't have 8 different stats that go up to 300, right? You have a couple of base stats. It's easy to keep track of the math. And I think that the gameplay is generally going to be pretty replayable, and there's just more so even than the replayability, but any given battle you go into is going to have the same set of rules, but it's going to have a lot of different encounters. You're going to have a lot of different scenarios to battle with, so I think that is more of where the challenge of the game comes from, and the novelty of the game, rather than having super complicated stats. You're not equipping a bunch of different items to your characters and creating, hundreds of different versions of the characters, right? It's not Fire Emblem. I would say that this is not going to be the game if you're somebody that really likes more of the run and gun type of action games. This is more akin to a point and click game, right? It's very story focused. If you are somebody that really needs to have action in your games, this is probably not the one for you. And I think also gamers that are really focused on, a wide set of characters. Again, I mentioned sort of RPGs, right? This is not something where you're going to be meeting a big cast of characters, learning their stories, giving a lot of exposition and dialogue, right? The dialogue is more sparse. I think it was really good when it came in, and there is still a good amount of story that comes in. But this is not something that's going to be closer to reading a book. Again, Disco Elysium is one of my favorite games ever. This is a way different way of telling a story than that. And I think if you're looking forward to more of a straightforward story, again, if you like more of the linear, something that ties up, something that's more character based, again, I do think the characters are a huge strength of this game, but it's just a different way than you're used to, where you're not getting paragraphs upon paragraphs on a specific character. It's a lot more extrapolation and looking at the art and listening to the music and sort of building your own understanding of these characters. So this game may not be for you if you're either of those types of gamers, but other than that, I would highly recommend this game. I think it's very much worth. It's currently $20 on Steam. I think that's a very fair price. I don't think you should pay $70 for this game, but $20 is a perfectly reasonable price. Again, you'll easily get 10 to 15 hours, and you can get up to 20 to 30 hours easily if you really like the gameplay. I think that if you can get it on sale for $10, $12, that's a bargain. So I would highly recommend this game. I guess I'm not sure if I'm going to do like number scores. I would definitely give this like a something, probably like a 9, 8.5, 9, something like that. I think this is a really good game. It's incredibly memorable. There aren't any games like this. Again, I'm probably going to go back and play Pony Island now that I've played through this and sort of understand that a lot of his games have he has the 3 games Daniel Mullins does, but it seems like there are a lot of similarities in terms of the fourth wall breaking, the sort of mind-bending aspects of it, which I do appreciate both of those things. Although you can get a bit corny with it, it seems like he does a really good job being... Again, there's certainly some silliness to his games, but it seems for the most part like he does a really good job with not feeling overly silly. It doesn't feel derivative or too tropey when it does the mind-bending stuff, which is something I appreciate. So yeah, overall, really like this game. Obviously, I'm smiling a lot, right? You can tell I enjoyed this game. And I'd recommend you all pick it up, especially if you're somebody that likes story games, don't mind that turn-based combat. And yeah, that's all. Thanks for tuning in.